Hi, I'm excited to share that we have a new free bonus just for you.
We've started publishing our very own quarterly cyber risk management journal. It's loaded with over 30 pages of useful content taken directly from our podcast. Here's how we make each new edition.
So we start by transcribing the 4 or 5 episodes that we've published in the previous 3 months.
Next, we send our editor and designer the transcripts and our supporting materials for those episodes.
Then they revise all the text, they put clickable links in for all the resources, and they create the best look and feel for each episode.
And finally, we, Kip and I, make sure the finished PDF is ready for you.
So download the current edition now. All you have to do is go to b.link/CRMJ, that's the letter B, .link/CRMJ.
And if you like it, share it with your friends and encourage them to subscribe to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help you thrive as a cyber risk manager. On today's episode, your virtual Chief Information Security Officer is Kip Boyle, and your virtual Cybersecurity Counsel is Jake Bernstein. Visit them at cyberriskopportunities.com and focallaw.com.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today?
Hey, Jake. Well, I thought it would be a good idea if we took a look at this report. It just came out. It's publicly released a little while ago. It's a cyber insurance claims study, and it shows the top types of cyber attacks as well as their causes for the first half of 2020.
Very interesting. So who published this report?
This is a news source to my eyes. It's by a company called Coalition. And Coalition is a new type of cyber insurance company. But they've got a familiar story, right? They're a Silicon Valley startup. Their valuation is over $1 billion now. So it's a unicorn. Yep. They currently insure about 25,000 small and medium-sized businesses, right? So this data set that they used for this report is coming from their customer base, right? So if you're a giant enterprise and you're listening to this, there's probably some relevancy here, but you're not in this data set. So that's okay though, because even though it's limited information, I still think it's useful, right? And there's some other biases in here. One of the things about Coalition that I find really fascinating is that they not only provide you with insurance, they also provide you with a limited information security team functionality for your policyholders. So if you were a giant enterprise and you had an information security team in-house, they would conduct security incident investigations for you. They would monitor your computers to make sure that malicious codes were detected and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what Coalition is doing. They're starting to actually deliver cybersecurity or information security services as part of the coverage that they sell, which I think is very innovative. So I just wanted to take a moment and just describe how Coalition is different than like the Net Diligence cyber claim study, which we've talked about before. We'll talk about it again because it's really good. But this is a new one, and it's a little different.
Interesting. So one thing real fast is that, the Coalition is not a sponsor of this episode or the podcast. We just found this. So this
I've never even spoken to anybody at Coalition.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard of them until right now. What I find really interesting is that they're kind of a hybrid company, really, is what you're saying. I mean, because when you think about cyber insurance, there's actually a lot of different players in the insurance industry. You've got the underwriters, you've got the brokers, you've got the all the different entities that are involved. And it can be very, very complex as to what legal entity has what liability for when. And so it's interesting that this Coalition company they seem very focused on cyber insurance. To my knowledge, they don't provide any other insurance products.
Well, they do provide errors and omissions insurance dominantly for tech companies, right? And that kind of makes sense. That's sort of their pedigree, right? Is kind of tech company, but their customer base actually includes a lot more than just tech companies. So that's one of the reasons why I thought this was going to be useful to explore with our audience, is because the data set, while limited and there's some bias in there, I still think it's insightful.
Yeah, so let's move into it. What was the number one claim that they found? I'm going to guess it's not shocking.
It is not the least bit shocking to my ears. It's ransomware. And 41% of all the cyber claims in the period that they examined, right, which was the first half of the calendar year 2020, 41% of all their cyber claims were ransomware. And it's really interesting because, again, the fact that Coalition has data, not just what was reported by the claimant, but they actually have systems data, right? It is what I see when I look at this report. So they actually have more data about their claims than I think a typical insurance company would, because they have direct access to the data.
Yeah.
So what they're saying, so what they're saying is that the most popular attack vector was phishing. And in fact, just to kind of back up for a moment and look at the entire data set, 54% of all the cyber attacks in their data set started with an email.
And when you say that, does that imply phishing, or does it just mean that somehow email was involved?
Well, they don't. Okay, in the report, I didn't read an answer to your question, which is a good one. But it's implied, I think, that these are phishing attacks of different types, whether it was a broad-based phishing attack or a spear phishing attack or a whaling attack. I mean, take your flavor. But I believe it. I believe that what they are saying is it all started with a phishing attack.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So that they helpfully use the nomenclature email/phishing. So we'll just assume it was the same thing. So, okay, very interesting. And I like how I think you're right about this, how they have having the percentage broken down, or having the claims broken down by attack technique is really quite interesting. It's frightening to me that remote access is 29%.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why I thought our audience would really appreciate this, because cause and effect, right? Insurance companies that are selling cyber policies have a big problem in front of them right now, and have been for years, which is this. Okay, if I'm going to sell an insurance policy, it is in my best interest as the insurer to decrease the risk of a claim, right? That's the way all insurance really works, or most all insurance works, like fire insurance, right? Okay, if I'm going to sell you a fire insurance policy, I need to know that you have sprinklers built into your building. I need to know that there's a fire department within a reasonable distance. I need to know that there's a fire hydrant within a reasonable distance, all that stuff, right? And so you get a preferred rate. Well, insurance for cyber is still trying to sort that out. And I think this is really interesting because Coalition is going to have actual data about the claim separate from what the claimants report, right? So they're going to see it more clearly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's a lot of places that you're just not going to get fire insurance without, a certain minimum level of protection. And
right.
I wonder if that's going to be, my guess is that we'll move there with cyber insurance as well.
Absolutely.
As we've talked about in the past.
Yep. That is absolutely going to be the case.
So if ransomware was 41% of all cyber claims, what was the number two claim, and what was the percentage of that?
Okay, so no one will be shocked by this either, right? There's really no shocking information. Well, I could think there's like one thing in here I think people will find surprising, but we'll get to that later. But the number two claim was funds transfer fraud, and it was 27% of all the claims that they received. So
is funds transfer fraud the same thing as a business email compromise, or is this different?
No, I think so, because a funds transfer fraud that didn't involve technology, like if it was an insider, embezzlement or something like that, I think that would be categorized differently.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's the number one and the number two claim, right? There's others, go get the report, take a look at it. There's others. That's what we have time to look at right now. But again, because they have additional information, they also published about root cause. And so again, there's no surprises here, right? But what are some of the root causes? Well, remote access, was the root cause of a lot of the ransomware incidents, right? In other words, because everybody went to remote work fast as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the quarantines, there's a lot more remote access surface area to attack, and a lot of it's not configured very well because it was put in quickly. So that's one root cause, and then another root cause of the funds transfer incidents was all kinds of email shenanigans. So intrusion into an email system, invoice manipulation, domain spoofing, right? So all of this is really under the umbrella of phishing, I think, because that's, that these are just specific techniques.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think that's really important. So how about the deal, what is the deal with email here? And does it matter which provider you use? Is there anything that people should look out for?
Now, here's the thing that I thought was insightful. I had suspected this, but I'd never seen any actual data on it. And according to this study, organizations that use Microsoft Office 365 for their email were more than 3 times as likely to experience a business email compromise as compared to organizations that used Gmail.
So do they have any reason for that? Is it?
They didn't say.
Because to my knowledge, Microsoft Office 365 it remains far more popular amongst businesses, but I wonder if it has something to do with the Exchange server, the built-in, maybe just the default levels of security could be different. Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah,
and I would really love to know more.
So I can share a little bit of information with you that was not in the report, but that I went off and found out for myself. So what I found out, one thing I found out that I thought was really interesting is Google's installed base for Gmail is way bigger than Office 365, like 10 to 1, something like that. It's a huge number. Gmail, right? Much bigger than Office 365, and they've been doing it longer.
Taking into account consumer like free Gmail accounts.
It does, but that's relevant here because if you're trying to put anti-phishing controls on the customers of your email system, the more data you have about what those attacks are actually like, and the more years you have doing that work, it's likely you're going to be better at it. You're going to be better at detecting it. You're going to be better at getting rid of it, better at preventing it. And so I think what's going on here, one thing that's going on is Google just knows how to do it better right now. And that's not to say that Microsoft won't catch up as their installed base grows. They probably will. But that's kind of like the state of the art right now is very uneven between them. And I think that's why. And another thing that I think is going on too is, and again, it goes back to your point about how Gmail has a lot of non-business users, right? Just college kids and just people who just need a personal email address, and that is targeting. So if I'm going to spearfish you or I'm going to whale you, okay, well I presume that the whales are in O365. So I just choose that one, right? It's the same reason why Windows as an operating system is more targeted than Linux or Mac OS or whatever. It's because that's that's where the fish are, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, I think you're going to go where the biggest players are, and that is the case. Plus, I'm not sure how easy it is to. I mean, Gmail is a proprietary system that has not. I mean, in some ways, it's younger than Exchange is, but anyway, we're speculating.
But Exchange has a history of being an on-premises solution that had limited scalability, right? So you might scale it to the size of a Boeing or a large enterprise, right? But O365 is scaled way beyond that, right? whereas Gmail has been operated at scale from the beginning. So that's a little difference in their history.
For sure. So, okay. What are the, do they have industry data? Because you had mentioned that they have about 25,000 insureds, and I'm really curious to know if they have, if they have data broken down by industries.
Yeah, they did. Now, this report wasn't as bristling with data as the Verizon data breach.
Of course not. Nothing can
report,
be as
right?
Nothing as data heavy as the the good old DBIR.
The DBIR. But I couldn't help myself as I read this report. I was like, come on, more, right? Give me more data. Well, so they had some information. And my big takeaway from what they did offer was that when it comes to ransomware, their data set showed that retailers, professional services, and healthcare were most often the victims of ransomware, which I thought was interesting because if you just looked at the headlines in the news, you would think healthcare would be number one. And maybe they are, across the board. But, and so maybe Coalition just doesn't insure very many healthcares. I don't know. But they were number 3 in this data set.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
And the business email compromise, right, or the phishing. Well, the number 1 and the number 2 industries there are professional services and financial services. So what I thought was pretty interesting about this, right, is that professional services is number 1 attacked for business email compromise and number 2 attacked for ransomware. And so then I looked in the mirror and I said, thank God I have cyber insurance. Because that's a big part of what I do, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, and I wonder too if, one of the limitations of this data set is that it is small and medium sized business. So you're, I think, it might be difficult to draw too many conclusions about, I wouldn't necessarily use this to draw conclusions about enterprise.
No, not necessarily. And I think there's some real limits even in terms of the small, medium business profile, right? I mean, their data set does not include, probably like if I went to a statistician and I said, does their data set include a representative sample of all SMB? And,
they'd say no.
Yeah, they'd probably say no. I'm not sure, right? Because I haven't seen the data set, but there are some disclaimers in the report that make me believe that that's probably what would happen. If a statistician took a look at this, and so is there 90% confidence in these results? I'm not even sure that they've reached that level, but I just think this is a very interesting thing because I believe in the future, right? They're probably going to grow. And other people are going to copy their business model. And I think future claim studies will look more like this. And really, let's face it, right now, as a cyber risk manager, you need all the data you can get to figure out what works. Because that's ultimately where I want to take this episode today.
And one of the things that's great actually about this is I'm seeing here that, in their sample, a large organization is revenue of 100 to 250 million, which, the reason that's great is that, we often talk about our client demographic, and this company appears to be squarely in that zone, which is really helpful because so much of the time, it's actually hard to get information on stuff that's not enterprise. So I want to just clarify that it's not a negative that enterprise isn't included here. In fact, it's quite a big positive. So let's move on to, this is super interesting information. It's a young company. What else do they offer in here, and what should our listeners do with this information?
Yeah. So thank you. Nice segue. That's where I want to go. I think there's 4 conclusions in the report that we should take a look at here. And again, I don't think any of this is strikingly new, or I don't think there's any like really deep insight here that I've never seen before. it really reinforces my experience anecdotally and also some of the other things that I've seen published elsewhere. So there's 4 things that this report talks about. The first is that in their data set, they're seeing that the losses are increasing both in number and in severity. And they attribute a good chunk of that is due to the broad adoption of remote access, well, just technology in general, but remote access solutions in particular.
Which has become, I would say, non-optional during the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's right. And since this data set only covers the first half of 2020, I can't wait to see the second half of 2020, because I think that's when most of the shenanigans have probably occurred.
Yeah, that's quite correct. And I think what's interesting here too is that even though they say that the number of cyber attacks is not actually increasing dramatically, much more concerning is that the rate of success has been boosted.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I think, it might be that the number of cyber attacks can't meaningfully increase, because the fact is that, most everyone's being attacked most of the time. And we only define a cyber attack when it actually does something. And so what we're seeing is more effective cyber attacks. That's bad news.
That is bad news. Yeah, it just means that the attacker's success rate is increasing, right? Their virulence. I love using the health metaphor here, and I think it also backs up the basic assertion of my book, which is that cyber criminals innovate all the time, and so think about it. They're not attacking that much more, maybe 10% more attacks, but their success rate is much higher than 10% more. And so that just means that they're just getting better at what they do. Unfortunately.
Wonderful. So, yeah. I think the next point, though, is actually helpful, which is that cyber insurance works. And the reason it works is that it can pay for loss and play a critical role in helping an insured entity recover operationally. And that's something that I want to talk a little bit about, primarily because I'm experiencing it right now with the lack of sleep and everything, which is that I think people often don't realize the sheer amount of work it takes to rebuild a compromised IT infrastructure. And the costs associated with a cyber attack, I think people unwittingly focus on kind of the headline drawing data breaches, where there's, even those have, quote, hidden costs. For example, if you have to send out 100 million letters, physical letters, even postage is expensive, right? But what about situations where you don't have any consumer data and data breach isn't really a major issue? What happens then? And I think people just plain forget that, for example, if you're hit by ransomware, even if you have a good backup, let's just say that you do, it's going to take you days to weeks to fully clean your network or rebuild it from scratch. And during that time, not only are you making no money, but you're probably spending money on help to get that network back up and running. And I think that because of that, cyber insurance, this is one of the most important areas that it comes in. And I think even if you assume I'm never going to pay the ransom, which I think is easier to say in theory than in practice, there's a lot of cost associated with these events. And so I think that having that ability to stand on the insurance policy is huge.
And that's what our friends in the insurance industry would call first party costs, right? Direct costs to you, the person who's experiencing the loss. And the third party costs, right? Those are the other people who get harmed. So in the case of a massive data breach, that's, the money that you pay to send those letters and to make other people whole. And so, so that's what people are used to. But you and I have both seen cases where an organization that's actually not very tech savvy, that's operating some kind of a manufacturing-esque business, right, where there's some kind of production line, and they've got proprietary data that they need in order to either assemble products or package raw materials in a way that their customers want, and if you don't have that data, then you really can't run your production line. Like you can't make things, you can't pack things, or you're going to have to make them and pack them very differently, and that might actually result in a crisis of confidence with your customers. So, yeah, but back to the point, right? Cyber insurance, it's working, right? It plays a very important role in your first party costs and then getting you back into business, because every hour that you're not doing business is an hour of lost revenue plus all the expenses. And yeah, I mean, I just tell all my customers, you need cyber insurance and not one of these little dinky add-ons to your main liability policy. Like that's rarely sufficient. I saw one customer that effectively had $10,000 of cyber coverage, but that only came into play after they absorbed $10,000 of losses, and then every dollar above $21,000 was uninsured. And it's like uninsured. You might as well have no coverage, because you can't even call Jake for $10,000. I kid, but it's just, you look at the claims, right? I think this report said like $2 million. Right, was a typical claim amount, kind of on the high end, $2 million, right? And if you're an SMB, that's a lot of money. So, okay, so that's point number 2.
A lot of money.
Yep. So point number 3 is
what's point 3?
So nothing and no one is 100% secure. Again, that's nothing, truly revelatory. But I thought this is what they said behind that. They said claims were made by small businesses, large businesses, for-profits, and nonprofits across every industry, and despite investments in cybersecurity. In other words, these people were like a huge variety of shapes and sizes and types of organizations, and they were not uniformly asleep at the switch, right? They were all doing something to be cyber secure, but no matter what they were doing, these folks ended up filing a claim. So, and I don't think now point number 4 is going to sort of address something that our listeners are probably thinking right now, which is if I'm going to spend money on cybersecurity and I'm going to have a claim anyway, then what's the point? Just buy insurance and don't do anything. Well, point number 4 is going to refute that. Plus, in the future, you won't really be able to do that, because I think insurance companies in the future won't even sell you a policy unless you're meeting a minimum standard, right? Kind of an at a minimum, I would think, right? And if you did more, you'd get probably a preferred rate. But I think the takeaway from point number 3 is, like, if you don't think you're at risk, you're probably wrong.
Exactly, and we should point out too that I mean, and to the point that's coming up, just because it seems impossible to avoid, the attack, or just because you think, oh, I can just get insurance and it's fine. Keep in mind that, the level of controls that you've built in and the level of preparedness you have are still going to play a key role in determining how you come out the other side of an incident. And I think that it would be a huge mistake to assume I don't have to do anything because I can just buy insurance. I mean, again, as you said, even if you could get insurance by doing nothing, which I don't think you could, the issue is recovery. is much, much, much harder without being prepared. And so I think the final point here that we want to make is that, look, the root causes of security failures are pretty much known and predictable. And the coalition report echoes that. They say, and this is a quote, "The implementation of basic cybersecurity controls could have avoided a majority of the claims and losses. No cost and low cost controls would have eliminated a majority of losses experienced." And this is such a critical point. And I think if you listen to what the controls are that they're talking about, multi-factor authentication is essentially free for most businesses on most systems. I mean, you don't have to pay for it at this point. Routine backups, but routine off-site backups. And off-site doesn't necessarily mean a totally different physical location, although that is advisable. But we do need people to remember that as convenient as network-connected backup solutions are, the bad guys know about them, and they're not going to ask you for money until they've encrypted both your actual data and your backups. So this is,
but in the reverse order, they're going to find your backups. They're going to encrypt them first.
Yes,
and then they're going to come at you.
Yeah, they'll do it stealthy. They'll either delete your backups or they'll encrypt them. And because again, it's well, I guess all I can say is fire doesn't innovate, hackers do. And
right.
And
yeah, early versions of ransomware didn't do this, but
this is a really good example.
Do.
Yeah. I mean, the early version was, we'll just encrypt your live files and we'll hope that you'd rather pay us at the time relatively small ransoms rather than go through the pain and suffering of a backup restore procedure.
Yeah. Well, I remember 5 years ago, ransomware was, just like something that a consumer would get on their computer. It would tie up all their family photos, and they'd have to pay $300 to get it unlocked.
Exactly.
And that's kind of where it was. And now we're seeing,
however, you have
hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of ransom, and super sophisticated attacks, and
something else that. Sorry, so something else that this doesn't even take into account yet is that in the last 6 months, it is basically you can basically assume that if you've been hit by ransomware, they probably took data first, which means that, and the reason for that is that they want to, again, they're looking for ways to force you to pay. So now it's, if you do have, and again, this is a perfect example of bad guys innovating, because the routine offsite backup system is not that difficult to pull off. What it means is that by exfiltrating your data and stealing it, they have a secondary source of blackmail, which is, okay, if you do have your offsite backups that you can just restore, then we're going to threaten to, release this as a data breach if you don't pay. And so, again, it's just another example of ways that these criminals are making it harder on you.
Yep. Yeah. There's even the newest wrinkle that I'm aware of is when they're taking all your data before they're in your system. One of the things that they're also starting to do is they're vetting your finances. They're actually looking at your cash balances. They're looking at short-term investments. They're looking at anything you can liquidate to raise cash. And they're basing the ransomware demands on your actual ability to pay as reflected in your financial statements and your records. So, don't even try to negotiate with that, right? Because they can see your hand. They see every card that you're holding and every card you're going to get dealt. It's horrible.
Yep. Well, and it makes sense if they're in there for a few weeks in order to do all their recon before they actually hit the encrypt button. Of course, they know that stuff.
Yep. So and they're going to use it.
What are the other techniques that this report talks about? I see password management, email security, wire transfer verification. wire transfer verification is one of my favorite examples. I mean, talk about a no-cost control.
Right.
Literally.
Right. Yeah.
You just need to verify a wire transfer with a phone call or something, just one other way. I mean, it's not even this is a 100% a processes and procedures control. There are no technical. There's no software you need to buy. There's no configuration of anything. This is a totally simple. We can literally just decide that we're not going to do a wire transfer without a phone call verification. That's it.
Right. Right. Well, now there's some subtleties there, which I help my customers with, right? Which includes things like, when you do the phone call verification, don't use the phone number in the email that you just received.
Definitely not.
You're right.
Yeah.
And
there's some operational security things that you do need to be aware of, but they're not that hard.
They're not. But this really underscores another really important point, which is cybersecurity is a team sport, and it takes people, process, technology, and management all working together, kind of like a 4-cylinder engine, right? Every cylinder's got to be firing. And this procedural aspect is a great example of something that you can do. And so there's 5 things. Let me just recap, right? There's multi-factor authentication, and I would start with banking accounts first. Routine backups that are not attached to your network, and synchronizing to the cloud doesn't count. Better technical defenses against phishing, and that might mean changing email providers. This dual control for funds transfers, the 4th one. And then the 5th one is using an attack-resistant password manager to its fullest capabilities. Now, it turns out that those 5 things are very, very well aligned with something that we've talked about in a recent episode, which is the Essential 8 by the Australian Signals Directorate. And so if you want to future-proof your business, and if you are a large enterprise, you should be exploring the Essential 8, and you should be making plans right now to implement all 8 of those controls in the prioritized order and according to the maturity model that they have published. It's all free, super practical stuff. I don't make a penny by telling you this, but I do tell my customers that you really need to do Essential 8 because, again, what percentage of all of the cyber attacks and the claims started with an email? It was 54%, which tells you that the cyber battles today are not at your firewall. They are not on your network. They are at wherever you're processing email. That's where you've got to pivot. That's where you need to fight your battles, and that's where the Essential 8 will really come into play.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. I think this is I think these examples here are just even very, even more helpful, that we just kind of have to be aware that this is the world we live in, and it does not take a ton of money to protect yourself, but it makes a big difference.
It does make a big difference. But it is kind of like, resolving that you're going to eat more healthy this year.
Very much so.
Right? It's a different way of living. It's a different way of living. It's not quite as fast and loose as what you may be used to. And so you need to use a little bit more discipline. But really, I mean, this stuff is not, these are not fad diets. And, I think this stuff is totally achievable. Okay. Anything else before we wrap up, Jake?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today, we looked at a cyber insurance claim study that showed the top types of cyber attacks, as well as their causes or ways of preventing them for the first half of 2020. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport, so include your senior decision makers, legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness. So, if you want to manage cyber as the dynamic business risk it has become, we can help. Find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and focallaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.